Money never sleeps, pal.
How's the weather down in Cork today?
It's pretty
It's a
rough.
perfect summer day with rain.
Yeah.
Is it? Listen, we looking ahead to the next week here in July in this wonderful country of Ireland. All I see is clouds ahead of us. But it's par for the course, right? I was actually looking at it this morning, and within the time I had the weather app up, Monday switched to partly cloudy instead of rainy. So it's like that's how quickly things happen here.
Outside
But listen,
dining
great
weather.
to.
Yeah, outside dining weather, unfortunately. Yeah.
You got it. Listen, great to have you guys both on the show. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Pete.
Want to hear all about DramEx, how you guys are getting this going. Obviously, I'm on board as an advisor as well. Every now and again, I hear podcasts and video casts with people who are asking questions where they already know the answers. I'm only going to ask you guys questions where I don't know the answers yet. Okay. So,
That might make two of us, but that's okay.
some of it I do know, but for entertainment value, I will ask you, but I'm not going to ask any stupid questions. Okay. So just to get started, we're going to do Ernest first and then Brian. But can you share with us your backstory and how you got to this point of getting DramEx going?
Sure. So I've been in hospitality since I left university nearly 20 years ago, which is still frightening and a bit disappointing to say. 20 years went very quickly. So I own some bars and restaurants in Cork and Ireland. And so after about 10 or 15 years of selling other people's drinks, I kind of had a desire to sell my own. So out of that, Kinsale Spirits was born. So a guy called Tom Reardon, who actually gave me my first job in a bar that he owned 20 odd years ago, decided that he wanted to get into the gin and whiskey business, and he asked me to get involved with them. So that became Kinsale Spirit Company, and that's going about we're probably in year 6 now. 3 years of getting it going and bits and pieces, and 3 years of good growing trade, thank God. So that then educated me in the whole world of whiskey and whiskey trading and markets, or lack of, as the case may be, and trying to solve some of those problems that presented, I suppose, to me and us specifically in our desire to create a whiskey brand initially without a distillery, led to seeing could the introduction of blockchain and DeFi and all the wonderful things in Brian's world, could they help solve some of those problems? And I had met Brian at a Blockchain Ireland event 3 or 4 years previously, and was able to track him down through to the beauty of LinkedIn. Not that I didn't keep your business card cherished, Brian, for the day I emergency needed it, but LinkedIn is great for that stuff. So I was pleasantly surprised that you weren't back in Hong Kong, that you were in Ireland. So I tracked Brian down, and off we went.
Awesome. That's great. Brian, how about you? Bring it all together.
I started in Ireland back in the 90s working in a bank, and I wasn't here long because...
God bless you.
Yeah. This was before the banks blew themselves up. So back in the old days. And it was with AIB I was with, and very quickly after joining I ended up in Poland with AIB, and then after that Hungary. So most of my career with AIB was actually in Europe. And my life then took me from Hungary over to Singapore. And I was working in a bit of quant finance in Singapore, and I came across Bitcoin. And I was very interested in what Bitcoin was. So I still have many regrets about not doing more about it back in 2011. In retrospect, and is 2020 vision. So, but I was interested enough that I would have got involved in some of the community and begun to understand what was going on. And that led me to come across a project called KYC Chain, which I got involved with around 2015 or 2014. And the idea of KYC Chain, which is still a great idea, is to solve some of the problems of KYC using blockchain technology. So that was my kind of my induction into blockchain and all things to do with it. And that led in 2016, early 17, a decision was taken to try and do an ICO with KYC Chain. So we put together what is called Selfkey, which is still out there and still working today, and hopefully one of the quiet successes of 2017. So one thing leads to another once you open that Pandora's box, and by the end of 2017 I'd also been involved in what we would consider today to be a first security token and how that was organized in Singapore. So I have a view that the world of assets and how they are arranged, traded, and created is going to be impacted with gusto from blockchain and the technologies and the innovations that will come from there. So I look at whiskey as an asset class, as we can talk about more. Ernest knows more about the whiskey business, but it is, it's an old business, been around for a long time. There's not much technology in it, and the way that the trading and markets work is probably ripe for some change. So after meeting with Ernest and brainstorming a piece, DramEx came through. So I think that we're looking at tackling an alternative asset class here that needs some new technology, some new ideas to bring more liquidity to all the participants in there. And here we go.
Awesome. Well, you want to tell us, getting more into the detail, Ernest, what is DramEx, starting from a whiskey perspective? And then we'll talk about the digital asset perspective as well, as you just mentioned.
So with the whiskey business, it's different in the traditional big markets. So Scotland, Ireland, and the US being the main ones. The products are different, how they're made is different, but they all face largely the same challenge in that there's a serious lack of liquidity. You spend a lot of money to build a distillery, and then you have at least a 3 or 4 year wait time while you lay down your product, so your cost of production is sitting there, and you're meant to be producing all the time as you go along and laying down stock. If you want older stock, which most people do, that's your capital tied up for longer. So it's a very illiquid business, pun intended, I guess, and that's a challenge. And at the same breath, at the same time, so for example, Kinsale Spirits, my own baby, we released a whiskey without having a distillery because of challenges like that. And that presents its own challenge in that you are dependent on distilleries releasing their products to you, and so it makes supply chain uncertain and trickier. So that's the whiskey side of it. Then from the investor side of it, I suppose the good thing about whiskey is it's a very steadily appreciating asset, and following graphs of its pricing, it's held up very well through recessions and different events over the years. And I think the space is ripe for innovation. You have investors who are looking for assets at the moment that are giving a good return where most places aren't, that are reliable, which is something that couldn't be said of everything, I guess, in the cryptocurrency space. Hopefully that's not too controversial, but I guess reliable isn't a word that would be used there that often. And I felt that by marrying up these two bodies in some way, the illiquidity of the whiskey market and the craving, our desire for new asset classes, especially if they can be digitized, by bringing those two together in some way would solve everybody's problems.
I'm with you. And Brian, from the digital asset perspective, do you want to get more into that side of it?
There's various different ways of looking at this. You're looking at a product. You're looking at perhaps a security. So there's many ways you can slice and dice whiskey as an asset. But I think, as Ernest said, for sure what you're going to end up with is an asset that has a fairly reliable, as assets go, who knows, things go up and down, but a fairly reliable kind of path from when it is created to when it is put in a bottle and sold to somebody. So you can apply, say, NFT technology to this, and you can take a cask. A cask is a well-known, it's something that is well documented, mainly because the taxman wants to get paid his revenue, and so that you can apply an NFT to that, and then you can look at creating a marketplace where those NFTs, based on a construct that you put together, can be relied upon as representing those casks, and then you can from there take the first steps towards creating a market.
Great. And can you just, non-fungible tokens are NFTs, and just for folks who may not be familiar with that, Brian, can you talk about how a non-fungible token can represent this cask of whiskey and be tied to it, so that you have this, I'm going to use a big word here, provenance, that the two are immeasurably and the two are forever linked for the most part, right?
I would say we're at the beginning of an innovative cycle here, and even DramEx is going to be part of that. So I think we're going to have to look at in some considerable detail about how these things are linked together. Maybe I can take a slight diversion and I can talk about gin for a second, and more specifically Austrian gin. So there's an Austrian gin out there, and what they have done is they put NFC technology into the bottle, and that NFC technology is
Yeah.
NFT'd. So that bottle is identifiable both through the NFT related to it, and you can use the NFC technology to scan it with your phone or otherwise to prove that it is what it is. So I would say we won't use that technology with the cask, but there will be a documentary trail that will prove the provenance of the cask.
Okay, I got it. And then, Ernest, I mean, this is a big global market, right? This is a $63 billion market. And bringing DramEx to market in this, like you said, this old traditional market is it's a big undertaking, right? How, if you're thinking about this from the perspective of the timing, and we saw, last year an NFT, non-fungible token, being sold for 63 million, right? Which was a piece of art by Beeple. And, I don't think a bottle of whiskey is ever gone for 63 million, but the sky's the limit, right? How do you see this unfolding in such a big,
I had
market?
my own little part to play in that. So with Kinsale, we tokenized the cask and we sold it on OpenSea. It's probably 3 or 4 months ago now. And it was the first cask auction in that way. And we're lucky it caught some interest of the right people, and there was some good bidding on it, and it sold for $100,000, which was a nice even figure, and it was good. It was a good payday for us, I guess. It was a good. It was also good press, and there was lots of learnings from us, in that I could see that the interest was out there, but at the same time, that's not the kind of item that people were looking for on OpenSea. It wasn't the best forum for it, and so there's lots of. It's funny. There's from an industry that's been very traditional for a long time. People can see the big attraction of using blockchain to deal with provenance. So that's a big thing. Not so much in Ireland, but there are certainly some markets where counterfeiting is a big problem with whiskey. There'd be huge issues in certain countries. So there's big issues being changed there, or can be fixed as well. Also, there's a number of big distilleries, particularly in the US and in Ireland. Powerscourt, our own Powerscourt distillery in Ireland, announced that they were tokenizing their casks earlier this year. So people are kind of dipping their toe in the water in this space anyway, which gives me the indication that the industry is open to innovation. Maybe disruption is too strong a word, because I think sometimes disruption happens when you're not open to it and you're kind of dragged along, whereas I don't think that's the case here. I think that, and also I suppose it helps that Irish whiskey is growing at a phenomenal rate, particularly in markets like China and in Africa. So it's an industry kind of on the move anyway. And I think when something it's growing at a fast pace and evolving, there's lots of new players, lots of new investors, thankfully. It's a good time to bring innovation to it. So I think that industry is going to be open for it.
Yeah, I hear you. I've shared this story before with both of you guys, but what really got me thinking about this was my buddy Damo, who works for a liquor distributor. And he said, listen, Pete, I know you like whiskey. I've got these 2 bottles of limited edition whiskey being released, or these 2 different kinds of limited edition whiskey being released. And would you like a couple of the bottles? And I said, absolutely. And it was, I don't know, might have been €125 for the 2 bottles, something like that. And he said, I just stuck them in the cabinet when he brought them over, and I didn't touch them. And then about a month later, he's over again. And I said, hey, do you want to open that up? He's like, dude, do not open up that whiskey. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, it's already going for 800 pounds a bottle on some, whiskey marketplace in the UK. And I said, well, geez, I didn't know that. But if I were to do this all over again from scratch, because I'm not allowed to open the bottles, not allowed to drink them, because I'm going to have to do something with them financially at some stage, or so Damo tells me. If I were to do this all over again, and I was thinking about it as making an investment in whiskey, I'd rather just buy a token, right? Because the bottles are taking up space in my cabinet right now, and I'm not going to use them for anything. I could probably pull them out right now. I did move them into my office. But anyway, listen, in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is that when you change that mindset and you take the whiskey whiskey fans, people who are passionate about whiskey, and you put such an opportunity in front of them, well, yeah, it makes a lot more sense. Why am I going to actually, go out and buy a bottle? I can just buy a share of this cask, and it just makes a lot more sense, doesn't it?
Big time. And I think that so if you think of the difficulties of storing a large amount of bottles, imagine the difficulties of storing a large amount of casks. You're not going to fit many of them in your cabinet, and it's probably not such a good idea to have 250 liters of whiskey sitting in a cask in your living room anyway.
No.
But there's a whole science and tradition around cask maintenance and all that anyway, and there's people trained in it. But I think that you have it's difficult at the moment to act. So as you said, your buddy Damo made you aware of that opportunity coming up, and it's tricky from people outside that whiskey clique to get access to those rare bottles. They see it, and they see it on the secondary market. So they see it on Celtic Whiskey Auction or Whiskey Auction. And geez, what I would love to have the opportunity to be in a waiting list or buy that day one. And to even a bigger extent with casks, they'd say, Jesus, there's a new distillery there, and I saw that they sold off their first 100 casks as a fundraising thing for the distillery. I'd love to have had an opportunity to buy one of them, but now they're locked up for 10 years. So I think bringing accessibility to that and some equality even to it will be good for the market as a whole, because look, the more people investing in whiskey, the better for everyone. The better for people who already have those assets, the better for the people who are making them, and all the better for the people on the outside who say, I'd love a new asset class to invest in. And I agree with you, tokens are the way to do it. They just from creating a vibrant market where things are easily tracked, traced, and sold on, it's a lovely solution.
And exactly, absolutely. I think what you're saying is the two things is here, Ernest. First of all, you're creating the asset that is tokenized, and then you have the marketplace for it. Like you were saying, in OpenSea, you can buy anything like there.
Yeah.
That's NFT'd. So there's no specialism. Whereas the whiskey tribe, so to speak, is large, and it does exist. There is whiskey investment and consumers, but there's nowhere really for them to go to. If you have an interest in that, where is it that you go? Yeah. So I think DramEx is solving a lot of problems.
And there's not to say there's not a global whiskey community maybe is misleading, but there is little crossover, particularly in the investment space, between people who invest in Scotch and Irish, particularly, and the US. And yet, in the same breath, then Irish whiskey and Scotch are phenomenally successful in the States. And similarly, to lesser extent, we're smaller markets here. We certainly get through our fair share of bourbon and American whiskies. So I think that certainly that whole blockchain space and all those token marketplaces, it's very much a global marketplace. That's the whole thing that it's about. So I think that bringing those together will create a wider community, which will, you have people who are already interested in that space, but just the assets aren't being put in front of them, and that's what we hope to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was listening to someone this morning talk about their community building approach, right? And what they said was that it's 3 concentric rings. And in the smallest circle, what you have is these probably 100 users around 20 countries around the world that are your biggest vocal champions, your promoters, your evangelists, your fans, right? These are the ones that by their first name, and they know you by your first name. And they are the ones that will really help you start to build that groundswell. And then around that, you've got the people, probably 100,000 people around the world that are active on Reddit, active on Product Hunt, active on all these other forums, talking about and engaging with you on your product. And then around that, the outside is the rest of your user base. And you'd love to be able to engage with them. Some of them are just lurkers. They might give a thumbs up on Reddit or something like that. You may not even know they exist, but you know that they are a customer because they're buying your product, right? Building that out obviously takes time. But what I've seen with what you guys are doing so far is just, again, through like the Telegram channel and being able to see, there's some good numbers of people on that will probably form the basis of that hardcore community, right? As we move into the live mode with DramEx. And can you talk a little bit about how that's being managed?
Sure. I would say this is my first rodeo in the space, so I was relatively new to Telegram, and I've been pleasantly surprised by how I think we've around 2,000 people on our community already. like actively engaged, asking questions. And it's interesting. It is, and I can see from some of the questions that are coming in, some of them are people who have followed us in from the whiskey world and they're relatively new to it too. And others are really just, really interested in tokens and looking at it as an investment play. And I think from both sides, you have traditional whiskey consumers saying, geez, I really like whiskey. I know about it. I never thought about investing in that space before. And similarly, on the other side, you have somebody who's going to invest in something, but technically, in a way, it's a consumable. So they're coming from both sides. So there's been some nice organic conversations that have happened in the Telegram group and on Twitter. I like when somebody in either of those forums posts something and somebody else in the group answers it, and it leads a conversation. By the time you get to this 10 or 15 messages on, you say, okay, but at least people are engaged and interested. Because, as you said, with products of whiskey, you've some people are like who will know infinitely more about whiskey than I ever will, and it can be a very specialized subject, and that can make it inaccessible to people who may be nervous about commenting on it. They would like to ask a question, but don't want to. Nobody. I know we were joking earlier about before we got on this chat about we won't have any silly questions, and I know it's a real kind of school teacher thing to say there is no such thing as a stupid question, but you don't want to. Right. And I'm still asking them, but I've had 6 months now of Brian explaining to me the difference between, not all NFTs are tokens, but all tokens are NFTs, and lots of other things. And I've come out with some clangers, absolutely, real clangers and questions, and some of them live on AMAs. And I think so. You've having and on the other side with that crypto market, you have people who are there since like Brian since 2011 and breathe the space and are like active change agents in things like DeFi, and that things are changing by the day. So that's intimidating as well. And so having the crossover, I think, is nice. Somebody is interested in one space or the other, and then they can drift in between them.
Ernest, maybe just in your your first rodeo, as you so to speak, maybe just give us your views on your first few AMAs, because I think you kind of you had an experience, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and those are, for those that don't know, AMAs on Telegram are Ask Me.
Maybe it should be called DMCs, like the deep meaningful conversation, because the questions are they come hard and fast. Literally, my first one, I took a video of it. Part of it is audience questions, and they unmute the conversation, and you get hundreds of questions pop up in like 20 seconds. A video and put one LinkedIn because it's intimidating, and you got to answer those live. So you get a few. I'm trying to, Pete. I'm trying to give you a couple underhand throws to start you off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meatballs.
So you get, tell us about yourself and tell us about DramEx, and then you get, what are your token economics going to be, and you mean token economics, and you're trying to type live and whatever. But they're a very good way to engage with big numbers of active communities, and there's a live count on how many people. So you see how many are in the community, but how many are online. And you can kind of tell if that number is going up or down, whether you're losing the audience. It's very transparent. And also you can see how many of those people then migrate and follow you on Twitter or follow you afterwards on Telegram. But they're hardcore at the time. They're intense, but they're very beneficial, because once you've answered that question once, you're ready for it the next time it comes up. And you can polish it and
yeah.
So I've done maybe a dozen of them, and enjoyable. Beneficial is more of a word that I'd use than enjoyable. I hope it's enjoyable for the audience. I don't know. Maybe it's just beneficial for them too. But,
it's crazy how you mentioned crossover, and I love crossover. And I saw Ollie Walsh from Pipit, who did a crowdfunding.
He was following, and very successful.
Crowdfunding. He did. It was very successful, and he's doing kind of these quasi AMAs, where they're kind of crowdsourcing some questions and then does a video, puts it up on LinkedIn, and he's got a slide deck on the screen behind him that he's going through as he's talking through this. It's just, it's awesome to see all that happening and see that, AMA culture moving from Telegram back to these old school channels. Like LinkedIn is definitely an old school channel, right?
Well, I think it makes so much sense to know what people want to know and to tell them that, rather than just be firing out lots of information that they're interested in or not. It cuts to the chase, and as I said, it's a very good way to, even for us, we're talking to, there's a whole fundraising investment piece, which goes hand in hand with this. And I'd much rather be asked that question in an AMA and try and figure out the answer than in front of a fund manager. Like I'd rather have it practiced and perfected once or twice that way than the other way around.
Yeah. I've got it turning the tables on that. I've got a list of 40 questions that you should be asking fund managers, VCs,
Nice.
that really puts them on the spot. So that's always fun as well.
I don't know if I'll do that cheeky, but I'll try it. Yeah,
when we get to that stage. It's good stuff. Speaking of crossover, you mentioned bringing whiskey into the crypto space or the NFT space, and also at the same time bringing NFTs into the whiskey space. On the whiskey side, you've got some folks like my buddy Damo, who, when he comes over for dinner, I try to tell him about Bitcoin. He just doesn't want to listen, right? And then you've got on the other side, an associate. I'll call him an associate who will talk to me till I'm blue in the face about the next big crypto project, the next big DeFi coming, but if I want to have a glass of whiskey with him, he says no, right? He just doesn't like whiskey. So is there a bridge here for the whiskey lovers into the crypto space and then the crypto lovers into the whiskey space? We're managing both of those at the same time.
Maybe I'll start, Ernest.
There needs to be some real secret sauce there to make that happen simultaneously.
I suppose I have faith in DramEx because there's a real problem in a real market getting fixed with real technology. But you're absolutely correct. The when Lambo people look at whiskey as a really boring asset, right? But if you look at your deposit account and you look at the return on whiskey, it's a really exciting asset. Just because you have an exciting asset doesn't mean anyone's going to be involved. And just because the Moon and Lambo people might not be seeing those exponential returns in something doesn't mean they wouldn't be interested in that. When they are looking at a port in the storm, an asset class like whiskey is it's not getting no return like a deposit, but it's getting some sort of return as you decide which punt to take next. Finding the bridge between them, I think, is a challenge that's going on in the world of digital assets all the time. It's not just whiskey, and I don't think there is a well-beaten track on that bridge yet. So I think we're exploring new ground. We're experimenting and exploring how this links into DeFi and things like this. But I think it's part of the exciting journey of DramEx will be to build that bridge for this particular asset class.
Yeah,
and it's
Yeah, I like that. They're like I mentioned before, the community building thing. And when I say community building, I don't mean everyone going out and picking up trash in their estate, all together on a Saturday morning. I mean, being able to bring people together digitally from different walks of life, from different demographics that will have different buying mechanisms, have different ideas about investing, and you want that melting pot. You definitely want that melting pot in order to grow this big online digital community around this. Thinking about some of the more forward-thinking ideas, any good startup needs a good 10 years to mature, right? Where you say that it takes a couple of years at least to get from inception point of the idea through to a product ready to go. I've seen it happen in as quickly as 3 months, right? But call it 2 years. Then you've got a good 5 years to get through the rounds of getting up to a certain revenue level, getting up to through Series A, B, C. And then once you're at Series C in 5 years, now this is in traditional venture funded businesses, mind you, right? 95% of companies don't make it to Series C because they're either bought out or they die, right? And then after Series C, it's probably another 5 years to get to the public market. So great, 10 years to really mature. When you think about whiskey, any whiskey that I've ever bought has been at least a 10-year-old whiskey, right? Whiskey needs 10 years to mature. In the same way that you can do early stage venture funding for a project at idea stage, can you do early stage whiskey funding at idea stage? I love seeing some of these collaborative efforts between different distilleries, getting with big brand, well, not with big brands, but with respected brands, and doing things together. But, can you actually do this with, a good 10-year lead in, rather than just saying, we're going to buy somebody else's stock that is already distilled and already matured, and we're going to put a brand wrapper around that. Can you talk to how that works?
We firstly, myself and Brian were taking bets on when you'd use your first big whiskey pun. So I'm looking at the time. I think I might have won, Brian. I thought it would come sooner, but I'm still impressed, Pete. I'm still impressed. It's a good one.
Thank you.
Unintentionally, sometimes every conversation is littered with puns. We can't help it. Just there seems to be a lot of that when we talk about it.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I suppose even with the model of doing a token, and the way I see it, as Brian said it, it's they're real world problems, and we're using real world technology to try and solve them. So for us, again, building up towards a token event is to equip us and fund us to go out and do that, to build a business and tackle those problems. So it certainly is more than just creating a token and setting it off and letting one, see what's out there. Dram is the name of our token, and it's intrinsic to how DramEx and that whole marketplace and ecosystem is going to work. You talked about community a while ago, and we certainly would hope to have people who are in it for the long term. And I suppose one nice thing is, you said a while ago, is people who are into whiskey, consuming and investing whiskey, they appreciate the nature of things taking time, which is helpful because that it wouldn't be commonplace in a lot of crypto businesses. They're very quick and up to speed, which I guess makes them more attractive than the traditional slow routes, as you said. So hopefully, look, we'll take the best of both worlds to do it. But on an interesting aside, in my opinion, it's quite difficult to invest in new make whiskey, and I see very good appreciation between new make whiskey and what technically becomes new make spiritual, I say, because it does in Ireland anyway. It doesn't become whiskey technically until it's 3 years old or 4 years old if you're selling it to the States. But there's very good appreciation over those 3 to 4 years, because it goes from being an alcoholic spirit to whiskey. Literally it hits midnight on 3 years, and it comes. So the rate of appreciation is good, and 3 years is a lovely term of investment. And that's not and on the flip side, it feels like forever on the distillery sitting on it, saying like, we can't sell this for 3 years. So changing that whole paradigm of having to sit on things for a long time, wouldn't it be great if that cask and that risk or reward could be traded a number of times in that 3 year period, rather having somebody who needs investment sitting on it and waiting for the 3 years until it can be sold. So I don't think, while I hope that DramEx is a long-term play, and look, we're going to be dealing in regulated markets and with different rules in each one. So all those things are going to take time. I'm hoping that we can start shaving some of those traditional lead times quite quickly.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was 3 years.
3 years to
now
the day.
I know.
For in the States, it's got to be. They're insisting on being 4 years, which is, I think, that goes back to a lot of the American alcohol laws go back to prohibition. Whereas you don't have, well, a lot of bourbon would be aged. It doesn't have the same requirement.
I think as well, if you look out to the future, if assuming DramEx is the wonderful success we hope it will be, we will gather together, a community of distillers, of enthusiasts, of consumers into that community, and it would be our intention that, as we build out assets that are of interest, that would include the ability to invest in distilleries and other assets, not just the product itself, because I do think people have an interest in being, part of some of these new special innovations and other ideas that people have. And as Ernest said, it seems very distant and very hard to find for most people at the moment. So opening that up so that there's more sources of funding for these new ideas, plus that there's more people who have an interest getting an opportunity, is probably a good idea.
Something that Brian made me aware of was an idea, which is a very interesting idea from somebody who's on the whiskey space, your distillery incubator program, Brian. So one of the beauties of tokens in that very transparent, governance that can be run through tokens, and empowering those community and token holders to decide what distilleries to invest in, what products to be created, would be a very powerful tool, and something that isn't really out there or accessible for most people.
Yeah, I'm with you. If you think about the early stages of both of your careers, can you tell me number one lesson learned from your early careers that now have been applicable and have helped you in the journey so far with DramEx?
Hard question.
Well, I was very lucky to work with some tremendous people in AIB. I was in a little niche part of it, and we were dealing immediately with international business, and I learned very, very quickly the value of trying to understand where other people are coming from and how to relate to them, and to have patience with understanding other people and things like that. So I look at something like Dram. To be a success, it's going to have to be a global something. We never mentioned Japanese whiskey. We never mentioned the biggest market in the world over in India. Yeah. So these things are very international, and having that ability to, take a pause and understand is very important.
Yeah, I'm with you. I would, Ernest, while you're thinking about this one, I was generally, when I was working for BNP Paribas all those years, when I started speaking with people where English was not their first language, I would move into a very clear and articulate and enunciated version of my voice. And we were working with a group in Brazil. And even though there were some people on the project team in Dublin that had perfectly articulated versions of the English language coming out of their mouths, I was the only one they could understand. Because not only were you speaking clearly, but you were also listening. And that is critically important, right? Ernest, what do you think? Number one lesson learned from earlier in your career?
For me, I started business quite young, which meant I was very green. I'm probably, once I'm not green, I'm less green. So I've never been afraid to ask people for advice, including potential competitors. And I didn't know anything about the space heading into it, but that has probably stood to me somewhat in that this whole role of advisors, as I talked to two of our strategic advisors here, who DramEx would have been possible without. I like that structure and the way it is. And I think that if anything, as I get more, maybe experience is the wrong word, but maybe I'm in business longer, I find myself asking for more and more advice. It's not the opposite. And particularly with this space, it's so fast moving that, you'd ask somebody a question one day and then they'll come back and say, look, I've thought about that. And actually, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's been done before, so let's figure it out. So that not being afraid to ask for advice is encouraged, and I suppose, as we said, with the whole advisor role. It's one that I think that it sounds like naivety sometimes, but I think that if you're confident in your idea and your abilities, I think it's okay to ask people for advice.
Absolutely.
For me anyway, I value it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you're coming into a space new for the first time, there is no stupid question, right? And that if you take that approach where you're not concerned about what others may think about what you do or you do not know, you're going to learn incredibly quickly, right? So definitely.
No, there have been the moments when I've had the pleasure of asking Brian to explain the difference between an exchange and a protocol, which is very obvious to someone in your world and is less is a little more obvious to me now than when I asked the question. But we've had a few eyes up to heaven moments. Yeah. But then I've been patiently explained.
Trust the code, trust the cask. That's how I'm thinking about it. Okay.
Nice.
Next couple of months for DramEx, what does that look like, guys?
Busy. Lots going on.
Yeah, I think the crypto market and indeed the world markets are in a very interesting space right now. I think that DramEx will have to roll with those changes. But I would say what's important now is that some of that initial momentum that's there, that community, that evident community that's interested in this, needs to be gathered through. A fundraise needs to happen, and the building of the product needs to commence. So I think that it'll be all hands to the tiller to deliver that.
Absolutely, I hear you. And the way that we like to always end this podcast, gentlemen, is by asking, what is one thing that people would not expect to know about you?
Okay, I can start with that. I probably should have been a scientist, and I actually have I am fascinated still by mathematics. So I did, even though in university I did business and law, and then I followed that by accounting and treasury, I took some time off and I became a mathematician, and then I did quant finance. And stuff like how E, I, and pi are related remains one of life's great mysteries.
Wow.
So somewhere in the background, I'm a wannabe scientist who's stuck doing business.
Yeah, I've said this before. I'm the only one in my family without a doctorate degree. So,
Well,
you know, I have some inferiority complexes about my own education, but I'm pretty well educated, as we like to say. Ernest, what about you?
it's similar enough in that I started off, I trained to be a chef. So this is quite a different space for me, I guess. When I was younger, I was a bit of a hothead, and I probably had the right temperament to be a chef. You know, all the shouting and roaring that goes with it. I've matured somewhat, but I come from a family of solicitors, or lawyers, as you might say, Pete. You know, brother, sister, mother, father. Maybe I'd be a lawyer too if the exams were a little easier.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But I definitely was never going to be a scientist, Brian. The law exams are hard enough, not to mind the quant physics and whatever else. So chefing looked like the career for me early days, and it's pivoted 100 times since, and continues to pivot, I guess, onto this DramEx journey.
Yeah, and I love it as well, Ernest, that our path, you know, leads back to Brandy Pete's in Boston.
All roads lead to Southie. Yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, shout out to Southie. Missed the chicken parm subs at the L Street Diner.
Those are really good. Happy days.
All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome to get more into the detail on DramEx. Really, really enjoy being part of the advisory group as well. So thank you for bringing me on for that. And
thank you for your participation.
just looking forward to winning with you guys. You know,
Great.
and bringing this
Looking forward to winning.
Yeah, exactly. And bringing this to the world. Yeah. So great. Thanks so much.
Super. Thanks, guys.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pete.